ready? Thank you. I'm Paul McGavin. I am an expert in measuring and mitigating radio frequency radiation. We have had 3 experts review the Hammett and Edison report that cost you, I believe, $6,000, and of course it was $1,800 for Mr. Olai, sitting in the back, to show up today. And so we really should hear from Mr. Olai because you spent $1,800 to get him here. So what we're trying to say is that we have had this report reviewed by a PhD on the East Coast and 2 other people who've been trained to measure and mitigate radio frequency radiation. And we can tell you for sure this report is substandard and makes false conclusions and completely misses a methodology section. We had very simple questions about this report that we tried to get answered through public records requests from Thursday of last week through yesterday. We were absolutely denied by everyone in the process. No one returned a single call, even though calls were promised returned. Nobody in the district decided to try to get this kind of information. You need accurate information in order to make your best decisions. You can't just stonewall your way to a bad decision. I'm telling you flat out, this report is not worth the money you spent. You actually need clarification of what's going on, and I'm going to point out what's wrong with this report right now. Okay? This is called an executive summary. There is got to be a methodology section. I have reviewed 30 of these reports. Every single one has a methodology section. It's very important to know what meter was used, what settings were on the meter, what were the conditions upon which you made your measurements, what was happening in the classroom at the time, what time of day did you make the measurements, and were students present or not, or were things actually downloading or not. None of this is in this report. This report is nonsensical. And the most important thing to look at is you sit there and go, well, we've got some numbers, okay? And these are some numbers. And you look at these things called microwatts per centimeter squared, and boy, those numbers look like there are lots of zeros on there. What did you measure? Did you measure average? Or did you measure maximum instantaneous? Those are 2 very different things. Your body doesn't react to average. It doesn't react to the single punch over a round. It doesn't react to the 1 watt of a strobe light. It reacts to every single pulse that's coming at them. How many pulses are you getting? Between 10 and 600 times a second. That's what you're actually getting. And that is why you need to measure the maximum instantaneous, which was available to Mr. Olai when he did this study. I believe, we have to assume, he did not use that. Now, the meter that he used has been discontinued for over 10 years. I spoke directly to the manufacturer, NARDA, and I talked to Jerry Spinelli, the vice president of sales and marketing. He explained to me fully what was going on with the selection of both the meter and the probe. Both were wrong. The meter is over 10 years old. It was discontinued 10 years ago. They do no longer calibrate these meters, NARDA, because they have replacement meters. 520 and 550, which are much better, and they log more data. This meter, however, would log 1,500 data points. 1,500 data points are sufficient for you to get a log similar to Eric Wendheim's log. That's what you need to understand what you're doing. You don't want the summary of the average at the end. You want the raw data to see what is really happening in these classrooms. The key point is there's a bunch of traffic. It is very difficult to be 100% of the place all the time and be able to measure in every single place. So you have to have some good methodology in place to say, am I a reasonable distance from my Chromebook? Does this emulate where a student would actually sit when the activity was going on? All of that missing from this report. We have no idea. So in my attempt to try to get clarification from anyone, the school district or directly from the engineering firm, I drove over there yesterday, I had a conversation in their lobby, they refused to talk to me. I had a letter with them showing the California Public Records request. I had a letter with me showing I'm an agent of Mr. Graham's. Stonewall, stonewall, stonewall. So at the end of the day, the pattern of hiding information from the public is against the law. It's against California Public Records request. You can't do that anymore. What you really need is you need to bring Mr. Olai up here and ask him some questions. Allow the public to ask him some questions. You should actually want to know what's behind this report. All right? So the important thing to know is you take a look at Eric Windheim's report. He showed you this earlier, okay? That's a very simple thing to do. That's called, how did I set up my test? Where were the meters? How far were they from the sources? That's important information because the power density drops based on the square of the distance. This is important to know, all right? The other important thing to know is, what's the data stream? What does it actually look like? What kinds of peaks am I experiencing over here when Wi-Fi is engaged? And what kind of experience do I have over here when Wi-Fi is not engaged? Was there anything done to make sure that the antennas were operating when he made his measurements? We don't know. It wasn't said in the report. So the issue is, you paid $6,000 for nothing. Now here's the biggest problem. The probe that they used. The probe that they used only measures from 100 kilohertz to 3 gigahertz. You should know that we know the specs of your wireless access points from HP. They have 6 antennas. 3 at 2.4 gigahertz and 3 at 5 gigahertz. And in fact, the 5 gigahertz antennas are more powerful. Those are 7 dBi antennas. These are only 5 dBi antennas. It is absolutely accurate to conclude that because the Hammett and Edison, charging you $6,000, chose the wrong probe, they missed at least half of the radiation they could possibly measure because the probe itself doesn't measure it. Unbelievable. This is called RF 101. They failed, okay? If they didn't actually have it handy, they should have rented it. There are over 10 firms in California that rent these things on a weekly basis. You need to have the information of the frequencies that you're actually putting in your rooms. And your rooms are put in by these HP wireless access points are both 2.4 and 5. And the devices that they use are both 2.4 and 5. And you need to know how it measures when your devices are on and when they're downloading data, because that's what matters. Eric did it. He showed you right here. What a peak. 167,000 microwatts per meter squared. Think about that for a second. That's the biggest knockout punch you can get. And this is just an instant of time. This happens to these kids all day long. All day long. Why? Because you don't understand the nature of radio frequency radiation. But I explained it to you very clearly. It's a strobe light. And this is an inappropriate thing to put on the youngest of children who are more prone to this radiation risk than our adults. Why? They are smaller. They have higher water content. They actually are better antennas. The frequency, the guideline, the spec for 802.11n, which is what your wireless access points put out, by spec have to reach 800 feet. 800, outside. But inside, it only goes maybe 250 feet. Well, what happens in those two environments? Well, inside, you have things called absorbers. And those absorbers are walls, concrete, maybe whiteboards. But the best absorber of all? Children. The children are absorbing more of this radiation than anything else. And so the difference between 800 feet and 250 feet is the fact that you're pumping this into children all day long, completely unnecessarily, because you have a low-cost alternative. Something people don't talk about much, but I'm going to tell you right now. Any wireless network, the traffic from that wireless network can be captured by any pedophile that wants to drive their car to the curb, stick in a $100 device into their laptop, open it up. They enable what's called promiscuous mode. What does that do? That can capture 100% of the traffic on any school's Wi-Fi network. What are they looking for? They're looking for mistakes. Because who are the weakest users in a system? Children. What are they sending back and forth to each other? Getting around filters and trying to figure out ways to use this cool technology. They're sending messages to their friends, pictures of themselves and their friends, and they're making times to meet. My goodness, what wonderful information for a pedophile to have. If you had a wired network, you would not be risking that at all, because that person would then have to gain access to the campus and actually put a physical device on the wire. For basic safety of children, a wired network is what you want. And the good news, you already have big fat pipes in order to make your wireless network work. The big fat pipes come from the district to the curb, they go to the routers first, and then to switches, and eventually to the endpoints. Well, the endpoints, let me show you what they look like. Let's switch over, do the refresh. Can we switch to the slides, please? While we're waiting to switch to slides, I want to show you a petition signed by parents. And this is a petition that says, please turn off the wireless access points and please do wired internet. This is one weekend in Petaluma, California. Page 1. Are you over already? All right. 5 pages of signatures. Parents who realize that the National Toxicology Program study is for real, folks. You do not want to damage your children in your schools unnecessarily. All right, go back to the, please. What this is a animation of a classroom. The yellow is the wireless access point. To the right, each square represents the federal maximum public exposure guideline. This shows an analysis that in a single classroom measured in 2013 with my meter, court admissible, with the permission of the school district, and agreement by both the FCC and federal OSHA on how to calculate total exposure over time. This is the answer. You get 40 times the maximum public exposure guideline
About 20 seconds.
in 1 week. Let that sink in. You exceed the federal maximum public exposure guideline 8 times in a day, just from one wireless access point. Add 30 Chromebooks in there, and you're exceeding it by 50, 100, 150 times. Why? Because you're adding it up over time. Exposure over time is what really matters. Thank you.
Your time's up. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Graham, thank you for your report this morning. Based on the report given by Mr. Graham, do any of the board members have questions that they need to ask? Okay. Any desires to provide further direction to staff? All right, thank you. All right, next item is